The candles on my birthday cake flickered warmly as a chorus of voices rose around me, filling the room with laughter, music, and clinking glasses. Balloons floated lazily against the ceiling. The table was piled high with gifts, and for a fleeting moment, I felt as though the world was celebrating me. My friends, colleagues, and even distant relatives had gathered, their smiles reflecting the glow of the candles I was about to blow out. I was turning another year older, and despite the cracks in my marriage I often tried to ignore, I had convinced myself that this night would at least be free of drama. But as the crowd leaned in with anticipation, my mother-in-law stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Instead of joining the applause or offering her well-rehearsed criticisms about the food, she pulled out a stiff white envelope. Her eyes locked onto mine with a kind of cold satisfaction that made my stomach twist. "This," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "is what you really deserve." The room fell into stunned silence. I froze, cake knife trembling in my hand. Divorce papers on my birthday. Heat flushed my face. Humiliation clamped around my chest. Yet I refused to let tears betray me. I still remember the first time I met my husband. It wasn't some fairy tale moment with fireworks and magic. It was simple, unassuming, and yet it changed everything. We had crossed paths at a friend's gathering, where he stood apart from the noise, quiet but warm, his eyes holding a gentleness that immediately disarmed me. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and before I realized it, I was looking forward to every message, every call, every moment we could steal together. We were so different. He came from an influential family with wealth and prestige, while I came from a modest background built on hard work and resilience. Yet somehow, our differences stitched us closer. But from the very beginning, his mother's eyes judged me, weighing my every word, gesture, and choice. To her, I was never enough. She believed her son deserved someone polished by status and fortune, not a woman with dreams bigger than her bank account. She smiled in public, but sharpened her words in private, subtle jabs meant to remind me that I didn't belong. Through it all, I expected him to shield me, to silence the sting of her disapproval. But more often than not, he stayed quiet. His silence wasn't malicious, but it was heavy. It allowed her words to linger, her disdain to grow. I told myself love was stronger, that our bond could weather her bitterness. I clung to that belief, convincing myself that patience and kindness would eventually win her over. From the very start of our marriage, my mother-in-law made her presence impossible to ignore. She had an uncanny way of inserting herself into every corner of our lives, as if our union had given her the right to dictate the rules of our household. If I prepared dinner, she would find fault in the seasoning, declaring loudly that her son was used to better meals. When we hosted guests, she'd smile sweetly, only to whisper afterward that I should take lessons from so-and-so's daughter-in-law, who supposedly dressed better, cooked better, and even knew how to keep her husband happy. It didn't stop at words. She would make decisions that weren't hers to make, picking furniture without asking me, moving things around in our home, even calling my husband's office to influence his choices. He rarely questioned her interference, as though obedience to her was an unspoken rule. Through it all, I swallowed my pride, reminding myself to stay respectful. I smiled when I wanted to scream, nodded when I longed to protest. I told myself it was temporary, that if I kept my patience, things would change. But with every passing day, it became clear her control wasn't love, it was possession, and her son was her prize. The melody of "Happy Birthday" still echoed in the room when the moment unraveled. The cake, a beautiful three-tiered creation with delicate frosting roses, sat in front of me waiting for the wish that never came. My friends clapped, my coworkers cheered, and the children giggled as the candles flickered. I inhaled, ready to blow them out, when the sharp rustle of paper broke through the harmony of the celebration. My mother-in-law, standing too close for comfort, extended a crisp, white envelope across the table. The sight of her smug smile made my stomach sink. For a heartbeat, I thought it was some sort of cruel joke, maybe a card filled with backhanded compliments. But when my fingers touched the envelope and I saw the bold heading inside, petition for divorce. The world tilted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few guests turned away in discomfort, while others leaned closer, hungry for the drama. Whispers rose like a wave. Did she really just... Is this for real? Heat crawled up my neck, my cheeks burning as humiliation replaced every ounce of joy. Anger pressed against my ribs, heartbreak coiled around my throat. Yet I stood frozen, a knife still in my hand meant for cake, not for the wounds now carved into my heart. The candles flickered out on their own in the silence, wax dripping slowly, as if mourning the celebration that had been so viciously stolen from me. I turned instinctively toward my husband, hoping for even the smallest sign of support. A hand reaching for mine, a word to deflect the humiliation, anything to show I wasn't standing alone in this storm. But his face betrayed him. Confusion flickered in his eyes, followed by embarrassment as every gaze in the room landed on him. He opened his mouth once, then closed it again, lips pressed into a thin line as though he couldn't find the courage to speak. My mother-in-law, seizing the silence, raised her chin proudly. "It's time to end this mistake," she announced, her voice sharp enough to slice through the heavy air. "He deserves better, and tonight the truth comes out." Her words echoed like a gavel, final and damning. I searched his face, silently begging him to correct her, to tell everyone she was wrong, that he loved me. Instead, he looked down at the table, avoiding my eyes as though the floor held the answers he couldn't give. That silence, it cut deeper than any insult she had ever thrown my way. In that moment, the truth settled heavily in my chest. His loyalty was not mine to claim. It had always belonged to her. The silence at my birthday party wasn't the first time my husband had failed me. It was only the loudest. My mind reeled back to countless smaller battles I had fought alone, each one leaving a quiet scar. I remembered dinners where his mother would belittle my cooking in front of guests, calling it too bland or not fit for her son's taste, while he sat silently, sipping his drink as though the words hadn't been spoken. I remembered moments when I wanted us to spend a quiet evening together, only for him to insist we attend yet another family dinner his mother demanded, dismissing my feelings as secondary. Then there were the bigger decisions, the ones that shaped our lives. When it came to buying furniture, choosing vacations, even managing finances, his mother's voice carried more weight than mine. She would dictate, and he would obey, leaving me to swallow my frustration and remind myself that marriage meant compromise. But compromise is not silence, and silence is not love. Standing there, divorce papers in my hand and eyes of strangers burning into me, I realized this moment was no accident. It was the culmination of every time he had chosen her power over my worth. This was the final straw. For a moment, I stood crushed beneath the weight of humiliation, the divorce papers trembling in my hand like proof of my unworthiness. My chest ached, and every instinct screamed at me to run from the room, to collapse in tears where no one could see. But then, almost as suddenly as the pain had arrived, something shifted deep inside me. It was as if the years of silence, of bending and breaking myself to fit into their expectations, had finally cracked open a hidden core of strength I didn't know I had. I realized I'd spent my entire marriage trying to please them, cooking the meals she approved of, wearing the clothes she deemed respectable, accepting his silence as love. And what had it given me? Nothing but scorn and loneliness. The guests stared, waiting for me to break down, to beg him not to let this happen. My mother-in-law's smirk suggested she was savoring the thought of my public collapse. But I would not give her that victory. I straightened my shoulders, wiped the tears that threatened to fall, and told myself, this moment will not define my shame. It will define my dignity. I looked down at the envelope one last time, then set the knife gently beside the cake. My fingers no longer trembled. Instead of crumbling, I slid the papers fully out of the envelope, scanned the words briefly, and then folded them back with deliberate calm. The room held its breath, waiting for the explosion, the tears, the collapse. Instead, I lifted my head, plastered on the most unexpected thing of all, a smile. Raising my glass of sparkling juice, I turned toward my mother-in-law. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady enough to carry across the room. Her smirk faltered, confused. "Thank you for freeing me from a marriage where love was absent." Gasps erupted around us. Some guests covered their mouths. Others exchanged wide-eyed looks. My mother-in-law blinked, her confidence cracking under the weight of words she hadn't anticipated. "This," I continued, holding the envelope aloft for everyone to see, "is the best birthday gift I could have ever received. Today, I choose myself over misery, and I refuse to live another year chained to silence and disrespect." The room erupted again, this time in scattered applause, murmurs of admiration replacing whispers of pity. My husband stood frozen, speechless, his lips parting but no sound escaping. My mother-in-law's face burned crimson, her authority crumbling before the witnesses she had intended to impress. For the first time in years, I felt powerful, not because of what I had gained, but because of what I had finally let go. For a moment, the room hung in stunned silence, as if no one quite knew how to respond to what had just happened. Then, slowly at first, him began to clap. One guest, then another, until the sound spread through the hall like a rising tide. Some people cheered outright, others whispered with awe. But the energy had shifted. This was no longer a scene of my humiliation, but of my strength. My mother-in-law's face twisted in fury. She slammed her empty glass onto the table and stormed out, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. The door slammed behind her, rattling the decorations and cutting through the applause. My husband, pale and speechless, finally found his voice. "Wait, please, let me explain," he stammered, reaching a hand toward me. But I had no desire to listen. I placed the envelope back on the table, straightened my dress, and walked past him without a word. As I moved toward the exit, I felt lighter, as though a heavy weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Behind me, I heard murmurs ripple across the guests. She handled it with such grace. I've never seen anyone stand so tall, and for the first time, I believed them. In the days that followed, I packed my belongings with surprising ease. There were no tears shed over leaving behind the house that had never felt like home. Instead, I felt a surge of relief with every box I sealed, as though I were boxing up the weight of years spent trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. I moved into a small apartment of my own, modest, but filled with sunlight and peace. For the first time, every corner reflected me, not the expectations of someone else. Friends and family rallied around me, their support like a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. They invited me out, encouraged me, reminded me of the woman I had once been before marriage had dimmed her light. I began picking up hobbies I had long abandoned, painting, reading late into the night, even enrolling in courses I had shelved in the name of being a good wife. Each step forward was a reclaiming of the life I had sacrificed. I realized then that the divorce wasn't a loss. It wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning of one where I finally chose myself. Freedom, not failure, was my true gift. It wasn't long before my phone lit up with his name. At first, I ignored the calls, but eventually curiosity made me answer. His voice was low, almost pleading, as he apologized again and again. He claimed he had never wanted the divorce, that the papers had been his mother's doing, not his. He begged me to understand, to remember the love we once shared. But his words only rang hollow. "You had your chance to defend me," I said calmly, cutting through his excuses. "When I needed your voice, you chose silence. When I needed your loyalty, you gave me absence." There was nothing left to say. I ended the call, my heart steady, no trace of doubt. For the first time, he was forced to face the truth. His silence had cost him everything, and all he had left was regret and shame. Looking back, I no longer see my birthday as the day my life was shattered. Instead, I see it as the day I was reborn. Sometimes betrayal is the very push we need to stop clinging to what no longer serves us. My mother-in-law thought she was humiliating me, but in truth, she handed me the key to my own freedom. What I once called a loss, I now recognize as liberation. Marriage, I have learned, is more than a title or a shared home. Respect and loyalty are its foundation, and without them, the vows are nothing but empty words. A partner who cannot stand by you in the face of adversity is not a partner at all. Most importantly, I discovered that self-worth must always come before the desire to please others. I had spent years twisting myself into someone I wasn't, just to earn their approval. It was only when I stopped seeking it that I found peace. To anyone reading my story, my message is simple. Never let anyone steal your dignity. Walk away from what diminishes you and choose yourself boldly. Sometimes the bravest reply is silence, and sometimes it is strength spoken out loud.